All right. Hello, everyone. I feel like I haven't seen you guys in a long time. Well, that's weird. I haven't really seen you at all, given the meeting, but you know what I mean. Welcome to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. This is a series of live online presentations from experts who are devoted to advancing science over pseudoscience, media literacy over conspiracy theories, and critical thinking over magical thinking. I'm your host, Leanne Lord. I am an award-winning stand-up comedian, author, and Center for Inquiry Fellow. Hello and thanks to those of you who are watching the recording of this episode. And of course, welcome to those of you who are joining us live. You will have the opportunity to ask questions of our guest by typing them into the Q&A box. And we'll get to as many of them as we can. But to all of you, please be sure to check out the latest episode of Point of Inquiry, available wherever you get your podcasts. And if you haven't already, round out your reading list with Skeptical Inquirer magazine. You can subscribe at skepticalinquirer.org. Oh, and don't forget, PsyCon 2024 is right around the corner, October 24th through the 27th in Las Vegas. Now, August is winding down, and I'll be sorry to see it go, since August is National Napping Month. As a very tired adult, I wish I had back all the naps that I refused to take as a child. But more importantly, it is National Wellness Month, which I think is the perfect introduction to tonight's topic, saving your mental health from the wellness industry, with Dr. Jonathan Stea. We all know, sadly, that the world of mental health care is very much caveat emptor, buyer beware. Today, people looking to take care of their mental health face a market of at least 600 brands of psychotherapy and counting. Most are ineffective and many could be harmful. The $5.6 billion, trillion-dollar industry includes countless unregulated providers of mental health services looking to exploit people's financial, emotional vulnerabilities. I'm looking at you, Instagram. Our guest, who help us wend our way through the woo, is a full-time practicing clinical psychologist and adjunct professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Calgary. Clinically, he specializes in the assessment and treatment of concurrent addiction and mental disorders. He's a congratulations, sir, two-time winner of the University of Calgary's Award for Excellence in Clinical Supervision. He's also, and I cannot stress how important this is, one of the bright spots on Twitter. He is published extensively as a science communicator with regular contributions to Scientific American and Psychology Today. His book, Mind the Science, Saving Your Mental Health from the Wellness Industry, will be out on September 3rd. That's the day after my birthday, everybody. And it presents a no-holds-barred critique of the wellness industry's influence on mental health care. Now, I know that nothing comes before its time, but I feel like I needed this book 10 years ago. But tonight, our mental health hero is here to discuss and debunk the predatory pseudoscience and grift of the wellness industry and point us toward a better way to take care of our mental health. And with that, please welcome to the Skeptical Inquirer Presents screen, Dr. Jonathan Stea. Dr. Jonathan, sir, you have the con.
Thank you, Leanne. That's the best introduction I've ever had. That was so kind, and I love that. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm so grateful to be here. I'm a big fan of you and Skeptical Inquirer, and I'm happy to talk to everyone about this topic today. So I will share my screen and hope that I don't screw this up. So, and people, I'm assuming everyone can see this, so I'm gonna continue. So what I want to do is start, you already kind of gave a bit of the lay of the land, but I want to start with telling people what I do. I'll start with this slide, which will make sense in a moment, I promise. So for over a decade, my job has been and currently is working as a clinical psychologist in a local hospital setting. I help people who experience severe addiction and mental disorders in the context of a fantastic interdisciplinary team with other psychologists, social workers, and addiction medicine physicians, and occupational therapists and psychiatrists. I'm also an adjunct assistant professor at the U of Calgary, where I do get to dip my toes in some research endeavors. and supervise students and residents. But for the past several years, I've been on a mission kind of at the side of my desk, and sort of as a passion project, I've really taken to science communication. So I've been exposing and debunking pseudoscientific ideas in the mental health space by writing in various scientific publications and magazines and blogs. I've been doing kind of interviews on the news and on podcasts, and I've been really living and breathing this topic on social media for years, which has allowed me to cultivate a really wonderful and engaged social media community on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And at the same time, as a result of that, I've made a ton of enemies along the way, and I've really been trolled and harassed for years. So for example, coming back to this slide, if you haven't surmised it yet, that's my face pasted onto a sperm. Presumably I'm yelling untrue, it's pseudoscience. I don't know why. There's maybe something Freudian there, but I can't quite put my finger on it. Here's another example. Here you can see that I've been dubbed the head of Western pharma sales, and I apparently sell genetic snake oil out of a briefcase with a swastika. Again, which is kind of, it's really ironic because most psychologists, including myself, don't even prescribe medications. So, you know, how can I be a pharma shill? But anyways, you can see that I sometimes joke about this stuff because how else is anyone supposed to cope? Like here's another one, which is it's funny. And I said, you photographed me in what was supposed to be a very private moment because they got my wig, which I like. And then there's this one as well. This one's weird. I don't like this one because I find it kind of creepy, and I think that's more AI than Photoshop. But anyways, why do I put up with it? Well, I get that science communication isn't for everyone, but I do believe it's super important, and that the more voices we have, the better. And when it comes to mental health misinformation and pseudoscience, I really noticed a gap. There's not a lot of folks doing this kind of work. And unfortunately, on social media, trolling and harassment and that kind of stuff does come with the territory. And at the same time, people email me, and my inboxes are flooded with people just with burning questions from the public. Like people will ask me, Jonathan, is this website a scam? Is this guy a quack? Is this article legitimate? And after years of kind of answering these questions as best as I could and learning a whole bunch along the way, I really wanted to compile all that information and kind of localize it into this book, which is the slide that I have in front of you and what I want to talk about today. And I really embarked on this mission because I've seen so many people hurt by pseudoscience. And my aim in the book and in the talk is to really educate and embolden people to take their mental health into their own hands, to help protect against that mental health misinformation and grift and pseudoscience. So let's go there. Okay, so in 2018, millions of subscribers to Goop, which is Gwyneth Paltrow's $250 million natural lifestyle company, were introduced to this new promoted product. It's a $135 implantorama, which is a do-it-yourself coffee enema device. And the product's website claimed that coffee enemas can mean, and I'm quoting, relief from depression and confusion and general nervous tension and many allergy-related symptoms, and most importantly, relief from severe pain. And the company told its consumers, ask not what your colon can do for you, but what you can do for your colon. The coffee enemas were endorsed on Goop by seemingly respectable physicians, and that included holistic psychiatrist Kelly Brogan. You can see her name in the top left there. So what's the problem? Well, it turns out that shooting coffee up your bum is not going to help with depression or any other health concerns. More generally, coffee enemas have a really long history in the alternative medicine community. They were first introduced as part of the Gerson therapy, which was developed by physician Max Gerson in the 1930s for the treatment of degenerative diseases, including cancer. And modern proponents of the therapy still claim that coffee enemas can work by helping with liver and intestinal detoxification. But the scientific reality is that there is no medical theory or body of research supporting the use of coffee enemas. And in fact, they can be quite dangerous and result in burns and inflammation and bacteria in the bloodstream and even death. But Beyond the coffee enema, some of those Goop subscribers who were introduced to Kelly Brogan likely bought some of her books, and that included this one about depression. And in this book, they were introduced to even more products and services and, quote, natural treatments for whole body wellness beyond coffee enemas. They were told that there's a laundry list of supplements that was critical to their health. They were recommended to doubt whether the scientific construct of depression was even real. And they were warned about the purported dangers of other things like antidepressant medications, Advil, fluoride, genetically modified foods, antibiotics, vaccines, and birth control pills. In short, they were sold a cornucopia of misinformation. There's little evidence to support the vast majority of Brogan's claims, because if we look to clinical practice guidelines for the treatment of depression, say by the American Psychological Association and the American Psychological and Psychiatric Associations, we can see that first-line evidence-based treatments are evidence-based psychotherapies and medications and pharmacotherapies and psychotherapies. That's what we should be using. You won't find anything resembling Brogan's unnecessary and expensive testing and supplementing or dietary plan. And of course, there's no mention of coffee enemas. The issue, though, is of course much broader than just Kelly Brogan and her books and Goop, and it's been around for a very long time. Many people have heard the term snake oil salesman, or to refer to people or grifters who sell pseudoscientific treatments for fake health cures or fake health conditions. What people might not know is the origin of the term. It originally derives from a guy named Clark Stanley, who you can see on this slide, who sold snake oil liniment in the late 19th and 20th centuries as a cure-all for various health conditions. As it turns out, it didn't work. It didn't even actually contain snake oil. The bigger problem, though, is that snake oil salesmen never went away, especially with respect to exploiting mental health. So the problem is that there is an entire industry set up to exploit our mental health, and it's really predicated on pseudoscience, and it's worth a ton of money, as was mentioned. The global health and wellness industry has an estimated value of over 5.6 trillion, not billion, trillion dollars, and that includes sources of legitimate health, like club memberships and exercise classes, but it also includes alternative medicine products and services purported to improve health, but they're based on baseless or exaggerated claims and questionable evidence of their safety and their effectiveness, which I'll get to in a bit. Within the world of mental health care, like was mentioned, scientists have estimated there are at least 600 brands of psychotherapy, which is a ridiculously quickly growing number. I can't even name 50 different kinds. I mean, that's how expansive this misinformation is. Beyond the world of mental health, there exists countless unregulated providers of mental health related services in the wellness industry and the alternative medicine community who market themselves as either life coaches or wellness consultants or wellness coaches. And depending on particular countries or jurisdictions, there's other non-legally protected titles, such as therapists or psychotherapists or counselors or practitioners. Now, not everyone who participates in the wellness industry is out to harm. I think it's far from it. I'd like to think that the vast majority of these folks are really caring people who just want to help, and they do just want to make a living. But at the end of the day, regardless of their intentions, even if people believe they're doing the right thing, the selling of pseudoscience worsens health outcomes, and selling fake cures for real and fake conditions and selling false hope is a very real problem for anyone needing assistance with mental health concerns or illness. So before we go further, though, we should probably define what we mean by pseudoscience. And it's actually a nebulous term. So in short, it's a hijacked and failed attempt at science. But that definition doesn't quite capture its complexity, because the first thing to understand about differentiating science from pseudoscience is there is no single clear criterion that tells one from the other. And that problem of trying to figure out whether a particular discipline or treatment or assessment tool or research program falls under the purview of pseudoscience, that problem is known in the history and philosophy of science as a demarcation problem. So in other words, it asks, where do we, demarcate or draw the line between science and pseudoscience? And philosophers of science have been wrestling with this issue, this demarcation problem, for centuries. I find it useful to understand pseudoscience as best identified by a cluster of warning signs, such that science differs from pseudoscience in degree rather than in kind. And a lot of this work actually derives from Scott Lilienfeld and his colleagues, who was a legend, a psychologist and a legend in the field of modern clinical psychological science. And he devoted much of his career to elucidating and exposing pseudoscientific practices in the field of psychology. And one metaphor that he and his colleagues like to use to help solve the demarcation problem was to compare the distinction between science and pseudoscience to the boundary between day and night, like I have on this slide. And the idea is that even though the precise boundary is unclear, it doesn't mean that the two can't be meaningfully differentiated. And then the social psychologist, Carol Tavris, who wrote a best-selling book, she put it a bit more crudely, but I still think it's funny and apt for what she said. She said, pseudoscience is like pornography. We can't define it, but we know it when we see it. And so countless pseudoscientific practices are now in use for both assessing and treating mental illnesses and for improving mental health. There's no universally agreed upon way to categorize them, but some are more pseudoscientific than others. And so for illustrative purposes, I've grouped some of the unequivocal or clear-cut cases in the left column, and then there's ones that are more controversial on the right. Now, the ones on the right that are more controversial, they are more scientifically plausible, and I'll get to what that means in a moment, but they're still plagued by some pseudoscientific features and just sometimes low-quality evidence to support their use. Ultimately, however, debunking specific pseudoscientific practices really feels like playing that arcade game whack-a-mole, because new ones just keep sprouting up, which is why it's really more fruitful for us to understand and address the underlying pseudoscientific features. And so that means, as I mentioned, there's no single criterion that draws that clear distinction between science and pseudoscience, because that's just too simplistic. So instead, we look to a constellation of warning signs. And in this way, determining pseudoscience becomes a probabilistic endeavor, which means the more warning signs that we hear and that we see, the greater the likelihood is that we've unearthed something pseudoscientific. And so here on the slide are 9 of these red flags. And I can't go over all of them. They're in my book and you can find them online. But in my opinion, these are what we really want to know. We want to memorize them if we can, because in part, this is what we need to strengthen our grift detectors, so to speak. That said, one of these warning signs, in my opinion, holds more weight than the others, and that's the number 2 there, the one that says claims divorced from the broader scientific literature. And the reason for that is that this warning sign speaks to this concept that I mentioned called scientific plausibility. And that refers to an overall understanding of a scientific question based on existing evidence. So in other words, we don't need to start from scratch when considering the likelihood of particular scientific hypotheses or claims. Instead, we get to draw from the mountain of scientific studies that have already been conducted. Assessments and treatments that are scientifically implausible are disconnected from the hard-earned centuries of biological and medical knowledge. So for example, no matter how many studies we find that can find a benefit for homeopathy or energy healing, say, the mechanisms of those treatments are scientifically implausible. Homeopathy and energy healing cannot work, because if they did, they would violate the laws of physics and our understanding of physics would crumble. There's no such thing as homeopathic water memory or human energy fields that can be manipulated and balanced without touch. Any study that actually finds a treatment effect speaks more to the challenges of conducting clinical research than it does to the ability of those treatments to actually work beyond the placebo effect. The skeptic community has been shouting from the rooftops about the importance of scientific plausibility forever. And unfortunately, I don't think this message has been well heard among mental health professionals. And we know that it's flagrantly ignored in the alternative medicine community. But from a patient perspective, it really speaks to the importance of using science literacy skills when shopping for care, which I'll get to in a moment. So you might ask yourself, well, so what, right? If people think pseudoscientific practices, then who cares? Leave people alone. But unfortunately, the reality is that pseudoscience is not this innocent game. It's harmful in at least three ways. First, it can directly produce harm as a result of the therapies used. For example, either death or more commonly, just a worsening of mental health symptoms or health symptoms via the use of harmful therapies. So critical incident stress debriefing is one example, or conversion therapy is another one. Second, pseudoscience can indirectly deprive hard-earned money and time away from people, and this can result in a worsening of mental health symptoms due to a lack of access to evidence-based treatment. And third, pseudoscience is harmful almost at a societal level because pseudoscience can erode the scientific foundations and trust in professions that tolerate its use. So you might ask yourself, or me, or at least I ask myself this, well, then what gives? Why are these industries worth billions and trillions of dollars? Or in other words, what makes pseudoscience so tempting in the first place? And as it turns out, the answer isn't so simple because there's many potentially related variables that interact and they account for why so many people find pseudoscience attractive. One big reason that people are seduced by pseudoscience is the unfortunate reality that not all of our treatments work for everyone, including with respect to mental health. Even some of our best evidence-based treatments, such as cognitive behavioral therapy and pharmacological therapies, won't be helpful for everyone. And it would be absurd to blame anyone for seeking alternatives. And as a practicing clinical psychologist who's unable to help all of my patients, I get it and I empathize. The seduction of pseudoscience runs even deeper, however, right to the psychological and cultural lens through which we view our world. So there was one US study published in JAMA, and that suggested that even more important to alternative medicine seekers than being dissatisfied with mainstream healthcare is finding pseudoscientific practices that are more congruent with their own values, beliefs, and philosophical orientations. And if we simply just ask people why they seek alternative medicine, they'll tell us. They'll say that natural treatments are better than chemical ones, that mainstream mental health professionals don't spend enough time with them, that they aren't viewed as a whole person. They want to avoid the side effects of medications, that the big pharma is solely profit driven, all kind of, for the most part, justifiable reasons, unless they're fallacies, which we can get into. Also, our psychology and the social environment are at play and they interact with these reasons. So all of us at some point are captivated by fake science news. We all have personal biases. And if we're all online, which the majority of us are, including now, we're all susceptible to the algorithms and the structures of online social networks. And we're all actually targeted with misinformation and propaganda by grifters and even larger organizations. What's more, not everyone has access to effective evidence-based care in the first place, and this allows pseudoscience promoters to kind of slither in and open for business. So what the hell do we do about that? Well, in my opinion, we need to defend ourselves because pseudoscience isn't going anywhere because there are these many attractive psychological, social, cultural, and economic forces at work in its service. But that doesn't mean that pseudoscience is clinically effective or that it needs to be tolerated. We need to defend ourselves, and the way to do that is through a multi-pronged solution. So to protect our mental health, we need to understand what both good science and pseudoscience look like so that we know what to seek and what to avoid. And it's more than that. It's not just increasing our knowledge. We also need to tune into and upset the biases that filter the way in which we see the world. And that involves practicing a kind of intellectual humility and a heightened awareness in the face of our personal biases and our belief systems and our values. And I think that when we do these things, we're better positioned to persevere in our very faulty and our very limited mental health care system. So let's go there. The first step in this process is becoming acquainted with the concepts of science literacy and mental health literacy. So here's what I mean. I recently discovered a therapy called quantum neurological reset therapy, and here it is advertised on a functional medicine clinic website. If you search for it online, you'll see many practitioners claiming that it can be used to treat both physical and mental health conditions, from early childhood trauma right to chronic pain and depression. It has there's no shred of evidence to its name. According to its website, it was founded by a chiropractor, Dr. John Turner, and here's how it's advertised, and I'll read it. It says, quote, "It's a proprietary protocol designed to initiate a quantum shift in the nervous system by resetting the brain's response to emotional triggers for both past and present emotional trauma and stress." So if, like me, you didn't understand what the hell that meant, that's because you're not supposed to. It's using the sciencey sounding language that is designed to confuse and deceive people with an end game of selling products and services. The fact of the matter is that when we see the word quantum attached to any kind of therapy, you can be near certain that that therapy is a scam. Many of us know that the physicist Richard Feynman once said, if you think you understand quantum mechanics, then you don't. And that's because quantum mechanics is super complex, deeply counterintuitive, and fascinating area of physics, the obscurity of which lends itself perfectly to fake mental health experts who get to market their pseudoscientific wares, so to speak, in this haze of sciencey sounding language and nonsense. So my point is that science literacy, in a sense, involves knowing just enough about quantum physics to understand that the alternative medicine practitioner trying to sell you a therapy based on quantum physics doesn't understand quantum physics, if that makes sense. So in other words, science literacy matters because it can help protect us from these science-sounding fraudulent claims about our mental health. If we can learn how to gain just a basic understanding of scientific concepts and well-established facts, in addition to pseudoscientific warning signs, then we're less likely to fall prey to the chiropractor or the self-styled wellness guru or even the psychologist who nonsensically dresses up their brand of therapy in this vacuous scientific jargon. And on the slide here, there are 3 points here, and here's what I mean by science literacy. It's really learning about the content, its processes, and how it works on a social level. And unfortunately, poor science literacy in the public is a major problem. One large survey that I have on the slide here found that only 64% of Americans understood what probability meant, only 51% could define an experiment, and only 23% were able to describe components of a study. Now, if you're like me, though, the idea of science literacy can feel daunting because science isn't easy and no one is perfectly versed in science. And that's not really the point, because even experts are only experts in a very narrowly and highly specialized domain. What I need to remind myself and you that becoming literate in science doesn't mean becoming an expert in science, which is an impossible task. Instead, it means adopting that intellectual humility that's associated with a scientific spirit. And at the same time, constantly learning about science and finding a balance between trusting credible expertise and remaining skeptical about scientific claims. And I get that that's a tough balance. Like science literacy, our other friend is mental health literacy, which is similar, but at its core, it involves these 4 components, which is, again, it speaks to kind of content about mental health and understanding how we obtain that knowledge. And it's a bit more than that. It's about decreasing stigma related to mental health, as well as understanding how we actually obtain and maintain positive mental health. I like to think of it as a skill to be practiced over time. No one pops out of the womb as mental health literate. It's something that we need to pay attention to and hone as new scientific information becomes available. And unfortunately, like science literacy, poor mental health literacy is a major problem, because studies have shown that among the public worldwide, mental health literacy is low. And worse than that, people who have poor mental health literacy don't do well. There was a 2021 study found that those with worse mental health literacy were more likely to actually experience higher rates of symptoms related to depression and anxiety and stress and kind of feelings of internalized stigma. And perhaps unsurprisingly, they were more likely to or be less likely to seek mental health services. Relatedly, here are some pleas that I've put out on social media. The first one is, the Carnivus Aurelius account there. That person has hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram, where they're saying that antidepressants don't work. You just need to charge your thing in the sunlight. And the second screenshot is taken from an alternative medicine website where they're actually promoting ozone therapy for mood disorders despite any evidence. So my point is that social media, coupled with the wellness industry and the anti-psychiatry movement, which I'll get to, is making our collective mental health literacy worse. For example, there's a small literature on this. Here was a recent study that analyzed the most popular TikTok videos about ADHD. The study found that over half the videos analyzed about ADHD on TikTok were misleading. And staggeringly, they were viewed millions of times. And similarly, I was fortunate to join a really great study on a research team where we got to sample the top 1,000 TikTok videos with the hashtag mental health. So the top TikTok videos with the hashtag mental health from a particular time frame. It was October, I think it was in October 2021. And we analyzed the content. And when we analyzed the videos that had advice or information giving, we found that about 33% of those videos were misleading. But what blows my mind about that is that those videos were viewed over 1 billion times. So that's a lot of reach. And suffice it to say, we have a long way to go at improving mental health literacy. And unfortunately, I think it's somewhat of this uphill battle. And one reason that it's such an uphill battle is because there's these forces working against it, namely the misinformation promoted in the wellness industry and also the anti-psychiatry movement. So I just want to go there briefly and talk about the anti-psychiatry movement. You probably maybe have heard of the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, the CCHR. But if you, like me, walk down the street of Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles, you can gain entry into one of its museums, a multi-million-dollar museum called Psychiatry and Industry of Death. And you can see me looking really annoyed standing outside of it. And inside the building, if you go in, which I did, I only lasted about 10 minutes. My wife was really upset about that on our vacation, but that's a story for another day. But we went in and it was horrible because inside it lights up with terrified faces, tortured bodies, Holocaust imagery. And on its opening night, it was attended in 2005 by really high-level celebrity members of the Church of Scientology. And the reason for that is that the CCHR is a front group for Scientology. Now, Scientology is only one spoke on the wheel that really comprises the anti-psychiatry movement. In graduate school, one of my professors gave us an article to read that really blew me away. It was written by this guy, Thomas Sass. It was called The Myth of Mental Illness. And he was a psychiatrist. And the essay started by saying, "My aim in this essay is to raise the question, is there such a thing as mental illness, and to argue that there's not." And for me, the idea of mental illness denial was foreign at the time. Here I was in graduate school doing practicum placements and, going to hospital settings and reading about mental illness every day and seeing it with my own eyes. And then this essay by Thomas Sass comes across my desk and it sort of undermines all of that. And at the time, I didn't get it and I was confused. And, I understood that our theories and models of psychopathology were incomplete and they were evolving, but I just didn't get how people, let alone psychiatrists and other mental health professions, could just outright deny mental illness. And so I dug further and I discovered that Sass had in fact sparked this counter-revolution known as the anti-psychiatry movement. And he was joined in his efforts by other psychiatrists, now heroes of the movement, like including R.D. Laing and David Cooper, who coined the term anti-psychiatry in 1967 after the movement already began. And the French philosopher Michel Foucault was one of its intellectual pillars. And it's no coincidence that SAS was also a co-founder of the CCHR, that front group for Scientology. And so what I asked myself, and what I'll pose to you is, what were these guys rallying against? And, they did have a right to be angry because they were pushing back against psychiatry's dark past. Psychiatry does have a dark history of inhumane asylum care and inappropriate pathologizing of minority groups, and there's this perceived arbitrariness of diagnosis. The good thing is that the anti-psychiatry movement at that time worked. The movement helped push the discipline towards a more humane endeavor and a more scientific endeavor, and psychiatry really got its act together by closing many psychiatric hospitals, shifting patient care to the community and in regular hospitals. And the science of psychopathology greatly improved with a lively focus on the biological, psychological, and social contributors to mental illness. And as a result, by about the 1980s or so, the anti-psychiatry movement diminished dramatically, but it did not die. It just transformed and just kind of lost its way. And while modern psychiatry survived and it adapted by aligning itself with this scientific spirit, modern anti-psychiatry really became a pseudoscientific smorgasbord of misinformation, existing as a disorganized entity largely outside of the medical world. Because scientific criticism is now a built-in feature of psychiatry, and it's healthy and it's paramount to the growth of the discipline. But that's not what modern anti-psychiatry offers. Instead, anti-psychiatry aims to tear down the discipline completely and deter treatment seeking. Much like the anti-vaccine movement, its criticisms towards psychiatry are very moralistic and ideological, and not scientific, but really pseudoscientific, because its messages are often found on social media and in non-peer-reviewed sources such as blogs or books or opinion articles that are hosted on websites just dedicated to flaming psychiatry in a way that dodges scientific critique. So really the movement has outlived its cause. And so the decentralized lifelines of anti-psychiatry are given breadth from a few different sources. We have fringe scholars, we have consumers or patients who have identified with being harmed by psychiatry, and then we have Scientology. And so in academia, anti-psychiatry views find their expression in these Trojan horses of critical psychiatry or critical psychology, which are really subdisciplines composed of self-identified disgruntled psychologists and psychiatrists, as well as other scholars and journalists who base their work on something called critical theory, which is just a broad philosophical approach to understanding topics through the lens of cultural assumptions and social structures and power dynamics. Most of the insights, though, that are offered aren't new, and they're not really beyond which psychiatry is already acknowledged and incorporated within its own biopsychosocial model, such as the urgency to move towards a more humanistic model of care and away from the siloed focus on biology and pill dispensing. Outside of academia, we see that anti-psychiatry really has paralleled the footsteps of the anti-vaccine saga in transforming into this grassroots consumer movement comprised of patients who identify as being harmed and those sympathetic to their cause. And when you go to online spaces that share differing opinions and perspectives about psychiatry, it can really become unproductively heated because patients will feel that their lived experiences are invalidated and mental health professionals will feel attacked. The science, unfortunately, gets lost in disputes, elevating anecdotal evidence from all parties, and this results in really just a breeding ground of misinformation. So what does that misinformation look like? Well, here's an example. If you look at the bottom, there's Elon Musk there tweeting to hundreds of millions of followers that the harms of SSRIs outweigh the good in his opinion. He may know rocket science, but he does not know psychiatry. And what he's actually doing is parroting many of the old anti-psychiatry tropes or themes or ideas, though surely he's not aware that he's even doing that. It shows how pervasive it is in our culture. I've compiled a list of such anti-psychiatry tropes in my book. Unfortunately, I can't go over them right now. But really, Elon's parroting the third one there, which is that all psychiatric medications are harmful. And I just want to help us take a step back as well. When we do that, we see that the modern anti-psychiatry movement and now the wellness industry were always kind of destined to be bedfellows, because both the anti-psychiatry movement and the wellness industry both exist as foils to the medical industry at large. And the wellness industry has an even longer history than the anti-psychiatry movement. So for example, here's a magazine cover from 1924, and it's the magazine of a guy named Bernard McFadden, who some consider the 20th century's first celebrity health influencer. This guy was staunchly opposed to vaccines. He was known to strut around New York barefoot so his soles could absorb the earth's energy. He slept on the floor so his blood his blood flow would align with the earth's natural magnetic rhythm. And in 1899, he launched this hit magazine, and he made millions of doing so, which was really just an assortment of articles about misguided health advice, such as fasting as a cure-all, and just a lot of hostility to medical science. But it really wasn't. It wasn't until 4 years after Bernard's death that the term wellness, as we use it today, was born, and that's when the so-called father of the wellness industry, Halbert Dunn, who was a biostatistician, he first used the term in the Canadian Journal of Public Health in 1959. And he distinguished between good health, which was freedom from illness, and high-level wellness, which he defined in the way that I have on the slide here. I think his definition was quite thoughtful, but unfortunately, it didn't stick. And wellness, as we know it today, it really just quickly took a life on its own, because now in many parts of North America, wellness is on every corner. Across from your local Starbucks, you're going to see yoga and meditation classes interspersed with spas, weight loss, massage, acupuncture, chiropractic clinics. Wellness is everywhere. In her book, Rena Raphael is a journalist, amazing person. She wrote the book, The Gospel of Wellness, and she rightly points out that there's no agreed upon definition of wellness, noting that it's one reason why this industry has grown so big. It's really ballooned to include anything and everything, because if you ask one guru what they mean by wellness, you're going to get a different answer from someone else. Interestingly, I find within that disorder, there's also paradoxical order. Colleen Durkach wrote a really great book. She's an associate professor in Toronto. She wrote about how wellness promoters use the rhetorical power of language to sell in her book, Why Wellness Sells. And she really beamed a light on two opposing messages that bombard marketing materials of wellness. So on the one hand, we're told that we need wellness to enhance and to boost and to optimize. Yet on the other hand, we're sold products and services designed to treat health conditions and restore what we're missing. So I'll say that again. We hear something like maximize your mental health by treating your energy blockages and your diet deficiencies. So really, the term wellness has drifted from Dunn's original definition, and it's really morphed into these dollar signs, drawing us into this never-ending cycle of enhancing our health by treating problems that we didn't even know we had. And it's really just come to represent this wonderland free from scientific scrutiny. So I think a super important part to remember is that, at least in my book, I try to make this clear. Commodified alternative medicine is an ideology. It's not merely a set of unsupported treatments or pseudoscientific treatments. Rather, it has its own narrative, its own tropes to propagate distrust in mainstream medicine, its own fallacies to cajole audiences, and it really shapeshifts in its name. You can see it on my slide. There's a number of different names that it's been used, that it's been called historically. The term alternative medicine wasn't used until the 1970s. And it's a loaded term because it implies kind of a false balance. And then in the 1990s, we got even more shifting in the branding. We got complementary and alternative medicine. We got integrative medicine. And then we got functional medicine, which was invented by Jeffrey Bland to sell dietary supplements and shot to fame by its poster boy, Mark Hyman, who was an advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton. So I've showed you some of those anti-psychiatry tropes. Alternative medicine also has its own set of tropes, and I have them listed here, and you can see that they kind of take the form of unlike mainstream mental health care, alternative medicine, we as alternative medicine address the root cause. Mainstream medicine doesn't do that. Our treatments are safer, they're more natural, they are less likely to have side effects, they're more effective, etc. Those are particular alternative medicine tropes that it's important to really get to know. This is I'm just including this because Melanie Tracer King, the author of Thinking Thinking as Power, did this slide, and she used it to teach her science literacy class to students. And I just find it really wonderful. And she captures a lot of these alternative medicine tropes. And with her permission, I republished it in my book. If I have time, I do have time, so I'm going to keep going here just a bit more, because I do want to mention that alternative medicine doesn't just rely on tropes. It also more insidiously uses pseudoscientific journals to propagate and spread its misinformation. So, it's pretty well known that peer-reviewed scientific journals vary in quality. We have top journals like The Lancet or Nature, and then you have kind of lower tier ones. But there also exist pseudoscientific ones, and not just predatory journals that charge author fees, but I mean journals that publish on unequivocal pseudoscientific topics, like the ones I've listed here. Here's an example from the journal Explore. This is a double-blind, randomized controlled trial saying if you send positive vibes to water, you can make its ice crystals look more beautiful. Like, it's absurd. And then here's another one from this one, I think it's from the Journal of Religion and Health. This one actually entertains the idea that demonic possession is an explanation for schizophrenia. So these pseudoscientific journals is another way that alternative medicine grifters or practitioners can market their materials, unfortunately. And I think it's very insidious and dangerous. And at the end of the day, as many of us know, I think Tim Minchin said it best, what do you call alternative medicine that's been proven to work? Medicine. And that's because skepticism doesn't discriminate. The same level of incisive scientific scrutiny needs to be applied across all healthcare disciplines. But what alternative medicine does is it really puts the cart before the horse, and it inherently elevates pseudoscience in its commercial form as part of the wellness industry. And for it to succeed, it really needs that ideology or that narrative that I was mentioning. So I think this slide is actually the most important part of my talk today, which I've been kind of alluding to, but it's just the idea that we have gaps in mental health care and we have gaps in medicine. But the gaps that we have signal a call to fill our gaps with better science, ethical and equitable care. The gaps that we have doesn't justify filling those gaps with patient exploitation, emotional exploitation, and financial exploitation masquerading under the banner of wellness and pseudoscientific treatments. So unfortunately, as it was mentioned in the beginning, the world of mental health care is really caveat emptor. It's buyer beware. Unfortunately, patients need to navigate this space and trying to figure out what's credible and what's not. And in part, that is why I wrote my book, is to try to empower people to defend themselves and to take their mental health back into their own hands by, I have a metaphor here of kind of putting up body armor with the best offense is a good defense, because I think not only do we need to improve our science literacy skills and our mental health literacy skills, but we really need to learn the language of pseudoscientific grift and alternative medicine ideology to protect us from a lot of this misinformation. And at the same time, we need to practice intellectual humility, attend to our personal biases, and kind of just really persevere. And again, in an unfortunately limited healthcare system. So I hope that's not too dismal. I'm optimistic about it because I think people can really get good at this. So thank you. I'll leave it there for now.
Jonathan, thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was a lot.
Yeah, I went a bit fast. I'm sorry, but I wanted to get it
No,
all
no,
in
no, no,
there.
no, not
Yeah.
at all. Well, listen, this is why we record these things. You
Yeah.
know, if you, for anyone who wants to go back and listen, you absolutely can. And more importantly, share it with some folks. I had heard of the coffee enemas, but I'm really more of an old-fashioned girl. I like to drink my coffee the old-fashioned way. And I saw I feel like a little bit called out because I always just say if comedy didn't work out, I just be a life coach, and that's
I love that. My friend and fellow science communicator Ryan Marino says coffee is a friend, not an enema. That's a line
Ooh,
he likes to say. So I love that one.
nice,
So, yeah.
nice. And I will now take a hashtag mental health out of my comedy videos because yeah, laughter is the best medicine, and I didn't realize I was being completely disingenuous. But you said science literacy is one thing, mental health literacy is another, and then I just got this statistic that 50% of the adults in the United States can't read a book above an eighth grade level. So we're dealing even with the limitations of actual um, literacy. So we're struggling here. We're struggling with quite a bit. And you shout out to you mentioned one of my favorite people in the whole world, Carol Tavris. She was one of our early guests here on the show. The book that she co-wrote was oh,
Mistakes
I
were
had it
made.
here. Yes, yes, mistakes were
Mistakes were
made, but
made, but
not by
not by
me.
me.
Oh my gosh, like her and that book wanted me to just give it all up and do the type of sociology um that she does because I'm just so impressed by it. But yeah, thank you for mentioning one of our prior guests and one of our favorite people. But we have some questions here, and if I recall, there's definitely some pushback here about
Oh,
chiropractor
oh,
stuff.
chiropractic stuff.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's not the real question. Um, I will come to that. I will find that comment.
Yeah, well, I
But
tend to get that one a lot too, so I'm happy to address that.
well, yeah, can you? Because there are people, and I'm not seeing the specific questions, but there are people like I went to a chiropractor and it worked for me. I felt better.
Totally.
Is my experience then not valid?
Uh,
And I don't mean me personally. I
yeah,
have not, but people are seeing that. So what do you say to these folks?
totally. And there's good reasons why treatments can work, and not necessarily due to the purported mechanisms of change. So meaning a treatment may work for many different reasons. It could be and that's why we need to evaluate treatments in the context of randomized controlled trials. Like, do they work because of the purported mechanisms? Do they work because of
Mhm.
the natural history of disease? Maybe we just got better. Maybe they work because of placebo effects. Maybe they work because of a therapeutic relationship that was built, and somehow that kind of helps. So there's reasons why that's a general statement about alternative medicine treatments. With chiropractic, as far as I know, my understanding is that when I read the research literature, the most supporting treatment is for chiropractic is for low back pain. So there is kind of good evidence for that. But beyond that, it doesn't look well. And the evidence says that the reasons that it can work well for low back pain is kind of due to the manual manipulation that is done by other kind of disciplines like physiotherapists. And so
Mm.
that's just one idea. The reason that it's sort of a pseudoscientific treatment for the most part is that it a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is predicated on pseudoscientific ideas. It has a pseudoscientific history rooted in vitalism, that we have a kind of magical energy, um, life force kind of flowing through us, and
Mm.
that we have something called chiropractic subluxations, which are kind of dislocated uh, joints that actually don't show up on X-rays, and they don't exist. So um, chiropractors that will advertise that they're manipulating or fixing those things, that's kind of a pseudoscientific way of advertising. And there's a study, I think my friend and colleague Timothy Caulfield and his team did some work on analyzing chiropractic websites, and they found that I can't remember the percentage, but there was a huge majority that were stating that they had some sort of subluxation theory, which again doesn't exist. And in my opinion, equally worse is that I don't know if it was their study or another study, but they were advertising for things other than low back pain, which is what the evidence supports. So chiropractic for ADHD or say depression. And so that's a pseudoscientific feature.
Mm. Thank you. And it goes back to what we said right up at the top. It's just taking advantage of people's vulnerabilities when you are in pain.
Yeah.
That everything else goes out the window. You really want some relief, and it leaves you open to these things.
It's that
Um,
exploitation that's the beef.
yes.
Yeah.
At the very, very top, you mentioned our friend Gwyneth Paltrow and Goop, and Dr. Brogan was sort of listed there as an authority. How is she still, Jessica's asking, how is she still able to keep her license as a doctor?
Kelly Brogan. Yeah. I I wish I could speak on behalf of regulatory bodies. I mean, that's a really good question. I think that so a regulatory body of any bona fide health profession, whether it's psychologists, psychiatrists, physicians, nurses, social workers, the purpose of a regulatory body is to protect the public. That's literally their mandate, protect their public from harm, to make sure that practitioners are practicing ethically and competently. And I think when it comes to pseudoscientific treatments and misinformation, it's it's not an easy task for regulatory bodies, and I get it because there's a huge gray zone and that's hard to navigate. At the same time, I would like to see regulatory bodies step up and crack down on clear-cut, unequivocal cases of pseudoscientific treatments and misinformation. So people that are pushing ideas that, unequivocal anti-vaccine ideas that, vaccines cause autism, or COVID is a hoax, or psychiatric medications are all harmful, or mental illness doesn't exist. Regulatory bodies should be cracking down on that kind of stuff. And especially the promotion and the practice of unequivocal pseudoscientific treatments. Again, the clear cut cases, not that gray zone, because I get that that's tough.
Yeah, very tough. Um, Bart has quite a paragraph here, but this is again a point of pushback. Like, surely there are natural non-pharmaceutical remedies from many cultures from centuries past that have indeed proved effective. Um, what do you, is this one of those gray areas that you're talking about?
I think
Um,
the and I get it, because the natural trope is one of the alternative medicine tropes, and so it really piggybacks or capitalizes on this appeal to nature fallacy, which is the idea that what is natural is good, and we're all of our brains are kind of wired for that. We think that natural things are better than chemical ones or artificial ones, and that's just not that's a fallacy. It's a logical fallacy, and it's not really the case. But back kind of to the crux of the point is that that's the point of science. The science is to figure out what works and what doesn't. And if a quote unquote natural treatment or a chemical or a non-synthetic one is found to be helpful or safe and effective, that's fantastic. Then it falls under the purview of evidence-based medicine. It crosses that threshold. It's no longer kind of under the scope of alternative medicine. So a gray zone that I like to highlight, maybe with that example, is cannabis. Cannabis is a quote unquote natural plant, although it could be chemical or synthetic in forms of shatter or various kinds of concentrates. But cannabis is a gray zone because it's been found to be helpful in some conditions, like some types of pain and chemotherapy induced side effects. And it's also can be harmful in some ways because it can, depending on particular strains, like with high dose THC, it can induce psychosis, it can be anxiety provoking, it can be unhelpful for some mental health conditions. So that's kind of that gray zone.
Thank you. I know we're coming right up on the hour, but we have so many great questions, and I really want to ask about this one from Anna. We kind of get this every time we do the show, but I think it's important. She's talking about her mom. Mom's educated, acknowledges Dr. Mercola, I don't know who that is problematic, but yet continues to subscribe to his emails and sometimes cites him as an authority on, XYZ topic. How do you suggest handling these suggestions with a loved one who means well, but insists on relying on dubious sources of information?
It's a very great question. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mercola is a leader in the anti-vaccine movement. I've also had his
Oh, okay.
and he sells a lot of alternative medicine products. But yeah, to the point, I mean, it's hard. It's hard when it involves personal relationships.
Yes.
I wouldn't take the science communication approach because we know debunking works in a population level, but when it comes to the individual level, it's a human relationship. So I wrote a piece about motivational interviewing kind of techniques, although not in a purist form, but basically it means listening, validating concerns, expressing empathy, trying to understand a person's perspective, and sympathizing, and at the same time asserting what you believe too. And it's very tough to navigate because we want to ask ourselves, like, are we trying to preserve the relationship? Are we trying to be right? Are we trying to protect their health? So I wish I had an easy answer for that, but it's there's a lot of moving parts to that question.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Um, Someone wants to know why two versions of the book, Canadian and US. I'm assuming that the US one has smaller words, less syllables.
Well,
No?
it's
I-
it's funny. It's the reason the content is the exact same. It's just different publishers. The US international one is published by Oxford University Press, and the Canadian one is published by Penguin Random House Canada, and they have different covers because publishers do funny things like that where they try to cater to different markets.
Got it. Got it. All right. We are right at the top of the hour, and I don't want to hold you, but I absolutely do want to thank you for your time and for your presentation. And just to remind anyone, if you missed any of the presentation this evening, don't worry, it has been recorded and will be available at skepticalinquirer.org. And again, thanks to you, Dr. Jonathan, and always my thanks to Skeptical Inquirer, the Center for Inquiry, and of course to all of you in the audience. I'm always so glad that we had this time together. My name is Leanne Lord. Thank you so much, Dr. Jonathan. Good night. And if anyone picked up on my not so subtle suggestion, my birthday is September 3rd. Excuse me, September 2nd. The book is out September 3rd. So if you want to, that's a birthday present. I accept presents for the entire fiscal quarter. But Jonathan, thank you again. Have a great night. Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic.